academic market. And I think this is what we begin to see, particularly in the case of Singapore, that has done very well. Its two main universities, NUS and NTU, of course, are now very high in international rankings. My own university, NTU, is, if I believe, still the regarded as the #1 young university in Asia, if not the world. And so we are beginning to see how Southeast Asian universities are still very much founded on the ability of movement, student movement, for them to succeed. One, to be able to send their academics abroad to study, get their doctorates, come back and teach, but also to attract foreign students to Southeast Asia. Now, while all of this is happening, of course, by the time we reach the turn of the century, everyone's talking about the digital age, blah, blah, blah. And much of what we are seeing now, this is what Joe just said earlier in his introduction before this, the shift to online learning, the shift to online virtual universities began long before COVID. Why? Because in the context of Southeast Asia, Southeast Asian universities do not have, in general, do not have the kind of funding that the more powerful, the more established Western universities have. Collaboration, for example, cross-university, inter-regional collaboration would be a very costly enterprise for universities in, say, Indonesia, Philippines, or Vietnam, where to simply organize, say, a conference between African scholars and Southeast Asian scholars would cost a bomb, literally. It takes a huge share of the budget from these universities. So moves have already been made, have already begun to encourage, a movement towards online learning long before COVID has happened. All that COVID has done is that it's made obvious what we should have done a long time ago, which is to adapt quickly and to prepare ourselves for two things. One, the possibility that student movement might be affected, not only by things like virus pandemics, but also political instability, wars, conflicts, and what have you. And two, the needs of, I think, the millennial generation, where online learning is increasingly going to be a very real alternative. Already today, universities like Essex University in the UK offer full degrees entirely online. And for Southeast Asian universities to be able to thrive and survive in this kind of environment, it was necessary for them to also begin moving in this direction. Some universities have fared better than others, and you'll note that in the context of Southeast Asia, we've not been so badly affected by the restrictions on student movements, partly because of that nationalist agenda that I spoke of earlier. So let me give an example of, say, Singapore's universities. Everyone knows that many of the universities in Australia and Europe and England are suffering at the moment because students from China are simply unable to travel because of COVID. But in many parts of Southeast Asia, Singapore included, there have always been quotas on how many foreign students can be allowed into the local universities. And I think this is a wise move. It was a right thing to do, simply to make sure that the universities of Southeast Asia do not become entirely dependent upon foreign students as a source of income. So mobility, I believe, will remain a factor, but now we are talking about virtual mobility and virtual connections. What I think are the two important challenges that lie ahead for universities in Asia, and this includes Southeast Asia and other non-Southeast Asian universities in East Asia, South Asia as well, are two things. And I think some of my fellow panelists will talk about this later as well. One, I do believe that this current pandemic offers us a opportunity to radically rethink the kind of work that we've been doing, and to maybe accept the fact that the age of large international conferences that involves an enormous amount of traveling by participants is no longer viable. It's environmentally destructive, and it's economically costly. For decades in Asia, we've been talking about collaborating with our counterparts in Africa and South America in particular. For decades, we've been doing this, but there was always this problem. How do we organize, say, a Mexican Southeast Asian conference? How do you organize a Brazilian Japan conference? And the problem has always been logistics budget, logistics budget, logistics budget. Well, the great thing about COVID is that now we don't even have to think about that. Now we have every reason to continue with this sort of high level collaboration between not only students and scholars, but it offers us a golden opportunity where we can start working out, new programs and courses where we can begin to really work in earnest with our counterparts. The second thing, and I'll end with this, is survivability. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are already some Western universities that are already offering fully legitimate, complete courses online, and they've been doing this for years. Sooner or later, Southeast Asia's universities will have to deal with this, yeah, because given the choice between a fully online course, say at the University of Essex that I mentioned earlier, which is a fraction of the cost of actually flying and living in England, or going to a local Southeast Asian universities, many Southeast Asian students would opt for the former. So what's our advantage? Here's a time when I think we in Southeast Asia really need to look at what we are good at and what we can really excel in. A domain that I find interesting is the increasingly important and popular domain of Islamic finance. Malaysia happens to be leading in that respect. So this is an area where Malaysian universities can actually be at the forefront, to really go fully online, to begin to build, well-structured courses that end up with a proper degree. And I think this is equally true of many countries in Southeast Asia. Indonesia, for instance, the University of Samarinda specializes in agricultural sciences because it's smack in the middle of Kalimantan, Borneo. So I think it's time for us to do two things. One, increase our collaboration with our non-Asian counterparts, and two, really start looking for the strengths that we have. I do not believe seriously that we can or even should try to compete with the Harvards and the Oxfords and the Cambridges of the world, but rather we should look at where we are strongest in, and that really is in the domain of Asian studies. So mobility, I believe, is still going to be a factor, but we increasingly need to understand that the mobility we are talking about is a kind of virtual mobility. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farish Noor. So the next speaker is Dr. Muhammad Moinuddin, right? So Dr. Moinuddin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Farish.
Mohammed, your mic is off.
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah. Is this okay?
Yep.
Thank you very much, Faris and Professor Mochizuki. Hello, everyone. This is Moinuddin from Graduate School of Letters, Osaka University. As we have been talking here about the unexpected spread of COVID-19 and the effect on the mobility, as you can see that the situation is, of course, getting bad to worse, but the people seem to be less panicked as compared to the time a few months after the outbreak of the pandemic. In other words, people are learning to live along with the virus and are striving to resume the pre-COVID-19 activities. However, the condition of the student mobility beyond border is yet to be put on track. Many exchange programs which were extended for a few months or a semester have now been completely cancelled. Some Asian universities like Sri Lankan University has already informed its international partners about the cancellation of inbound-outbound student mobility for January to May 2021. The Erasmus Mundus EMIC Educulture Program's third country partner mobility for Japan has to be completely cancelled due to the several concerns. Today, in this panel, while referring to the pre-COVID-19 condition, I would attempt to discuss the changing dynamics for the mobility factors and their scope under fluctuating circumstances. Let us have a glance to the pre-COVID-19 situation by referring to some of the previous researches. Here, student mobility indicates to the general perception of a transnational process between a student's home country and the country of his or her education. In the words of Francis Leo Collins, such mobility of students is the bridge which often connects the transnational spaces rooted in the economic activities, quote unquote. Robertson et al. See this transnational mobility not only as a means of securing better education and employment prospects, but also as a way of creating a new space of identification and belonging. Since transnational student mobility plays a crucial role in the world university ranking, the universities from around the world have been putting a lot of efforts to boost the student mobility. Measures have been taken to enhance the number of inbound and outbound students. As pointed out by David and Knight, a dominant research trend for the last few years focuses primarily on the numbers of international students, their flows, the networks and such. As noted by Barnett and Wu, as well as King and Raghuram, the transnational mobility has been receiving immense impetus and scholarly attention across the world for the last few decades. Christoph van Moel addresses the issue of international student mobility in Europe from the interdisciplinary approach. Through large-scale empirical surveys, interviews conducted in Austria, Italy, Belgium, Poland, Norway, and the United Kingdom. It interrogates the dialogue of European identity and mobility aspirations of higher education students. By adopting a firm international comparative approach, David Cairns explores international student mobility in the context of Portugal, the Republic of Ireland, and the United Kingdom. David's findings explore the practical disparity between extensive interest among students to move abroad for higher education and the actual restricted nature of mobility there. Gall, in a study on the transnational student of law and economics in Great Britain, France, and Spain, talks about challenges often faced by international students in achieving competency over all these overlapping areas of academic and culture by bringing some empirical evidence. Anna Wells, in the context of Latvian students in English universities, analyzes the perception of the students within transnational social space beyond geographical boundaries. Further, Knight sees the internationalization of education as one of the ways of responding to globalization from a country. The transnational mobility of students has always aimed at internationalizing the higher education of the partnering countries, and further at strengthening the intercultural relations. The higher education institutions across the world are rated to be in better position on the basis of their ability to attract more students from other countries. It is significant to understand the factors that contribute to the student mobility. Parvati Raghuram has highlighted that a large section of research on migration studies charts new classical perspective, which interprets a student decision on the sheer basis of push and pull factors. Anna Wells notes, traditionally, pull factors are associated with the student's desire to move abroad, while push factors are those that make them want to leave their home countries. Having said so, how would these be placed under the present condition when the movement beyond the border itself is restricted? Let's examine the changing dynamics in terms of student mobility. As we all know that due to the pandemic caused by COVID-19, the mobility beyond borders have almost come to a standstill, and the global human exchange has been severely affected. Most of the higher educational institutions are going online. A kind of virtual mobility of the students is also being discussed, but would this suffice the need for mobility in real sense? According to Johnson on, transnational mobility is a multi-dimensional process comprising the physical mobility of individuals and their ideas, cross-cultural exchanges, remittance or counter-remittance, which affects their identity along with the diversity of the local demographic landscape. Broadly, two factors would be affecting the student mobility: travel restrictions beyond the border, and the second one is the financial crisis. The travel restrictions may be short-lasting, though it is widely talked about, but the impact of financial crisis may get longer beyond our imagination. Many countries have already started easing their travel restrictions, but the path to recovery of financial damage is yet to be seen. The financial stability of the students is one of the most important factors of student mobility. Pawan Agrawal, in his pioneering essays on India in the context of international student circulation, status, and prospects, elaborates on how the financial stability of Indian middle-class families instigates transnational mobility of Indian students. To note that India contributes more than 7.5% of the transnational mobility, which is the second leading source country next to China. A large number of students from India, China, and other Asian countries are dependent upon government or private scholarship or bank loan or for a study abroad program. A likely global recession will impede student mobility much more severely and long-lastingly. Other factors include the psychological effect that may be caused due to delay in academic semester in home country, and students failing to realize their study abroad plan. Besides, as it is widely known that many institutions depend upon the international students for revenue, the halt on student mobility has already started affecting them financially. The institutions have to find different ways to make up the loss. As a result, many universities are bringing down the criteria of admission while talking about different plans to somehow maintain the graph of international students. However, the question may be raised that would bringing down the admission criteria be enough to attract the international students? Won't it be affecting the quality? Could we fulfill the demand of world enterprises or institutions? The universities shall bring additional courses to prepare weaker students who would be admitted with the lower admission criteria. Besides, there should be some financial assistance in the form of scholarship or loan scholarship. The university may connect the students with corporate world much more than they used to do in earlier times and assure the international students about the job security. Talking about the scopes under changing circumstances. Concerning education, the mostly talked topic after the COVID-19 crisis surfaced has been the online or virtual education. It goes without saying that virtual cannot replace the real, and there are many issues with the virtual learning too. For example, cultural exchange, intercultural understanding, the issues of eye contact, real-time interactions, non-verbal communication, learning opportunity through interaction with fellow students, and so on. One of the main factors that is given was the lack of opportunity for cultural exchange in virtual learning. However, this is not always true that physical interaction is the only viable option for the cultural exchange. Bosque Bilesin offers critical insight into the geographical and emotional factors effective upon the friendship networks of transnational students. This empirical study conducted upon the doctoral students in Germany, it demonstrates that students from the same national form their own friends, like we can see the same in the case of Singapore, in the case of Japan. We need to think that how to overcome such shortcomings if we go virtual in the coming days. Despite having some negative aspects, the virtual education would also be opening new windows of opportunities. Online education is not a new phenomenon. Let's note, online education is not a new phenomena. It was there in the pre-COVID-19. Well, we have open university system as well as online courses from many leading universities, as Faiz has also pointed out. But graduates of such online courses were somehow not getting equal treatment similar to what an offline graduates are used to get. A perception used to be there about some sort of lacking in the online learning. The present situation caused by the COVID-19 would remove that perception, and we may expect larger acceptance by the industries and other institutions. It has also opened doors for virtual classes for those weaker sections of the society who are not able to go abroad due to financial issues. In order to change the perception surrounded around the online or virtual education, we shall redefine the online education or virtual education. It shall be able to answer all the possible concerns that are raised above. Regarding the impact of virtual education, it would be too early to judge, as till the online education has been a supplementary mode of education. I repeat, till now, the online education has been a supplementary mode of education. Most of the critical comments on online mode that are coming now are the experience based on those supplementary mode and of the education. At the same time, whatever the comments coming for the online mode, that's too based on the imagination. We don't have any kind of empirical data to analyze the effect of online education when it is not regarded as a supplementary solution, means when it is regarded as the main source of education. The COVID-19 crisis has forced us to move from supplementary mode and regard the online education as a mainstream mode of education. The concrete data which may be available in the future would help to analyze the impact of online or virtual education. Then only we can compare the pros and cons in both physical and online mode of education. I would like to conclude with following comments here. The institution shall think from a student's perspective, whose concern is to fulfill their dream by getting quality education and having good job perspective. There could be more collaboration between universities of different countries. People would talk less about competition and more about collaboration. MOUs between universities may start including articles related to online virtual education. I would say there should be collaboration beyond the hectic MOU process and conditions. Opening virtual campuses in different countries could be one of the viable options to attract international students. At the same time, double degree programs might be more needed in coming days. Digital library shall be enriched and expanded further. Despite several challenges in virtual education, there are many opportunities that shall be taken into consideration. The higher education could be easier to access by the people of all strata of society, including everyone, those who do not even belong to any country, means the stateless people. However, it has to be observed that how corporate world and the governments respond to this new opportunity. If the governments and corporates go behind generating revenues by putting lots of restrictions similar to the physical mode of education, then we may lose the opportunity to redefine the education accessibility, and the world citizen has to think of a system where all sections of the society shall have access to higher education, including those who are not regarded as a citizen of a country, for a peaceful world. At the end, I would like to acknowledge my JSPS ICSSR proposed collaborative research team for their direct or indirect contribution to this paper. Thank you very much. Back to the chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moinuddin. Okay, so let's go on. Our next speaker is Mr. Muhammad Noor from Rohingya Project. So please go ahead, Mr. Noor.
Yes, hi. Good morning and good evening, to depend on your location. I just want to pick up from where Brother Muhyiddin left, which is a couple of very interesting things. Before that was the Dr. Faris Noor, a supplementary education, and of course the pre-COVID situation. So I'm going to focus on something that is way before the mobility and zero ground. I will be focusing on education for stateless people and the refugee around the world, which is a huge crisis and an increasing crisis. So pre-COVID, the situation of stateless people and the refugees were already bad enough to they were already excluded from mainstream education and university education and so on. Just to give you some very concrete example, in many countries, stateless and refugees are not even given a chance to go to a primary school, forget about the university education and online education and so on. So these things has already affected the questions of mobility itself. When it comes to here, rather than moving forward, is actually going backward. In terms of mobility, they were not allowed to move. They were not allowed to even go in any primary education, and lack of identity, and many others, of course. So now these are some of the leading factors that now affecting the stateless people and the refugees, and particularly Rohingya, where all these factors now leading. Just to give you some of the example of that, before the COVID, there was schools, and then there's some institution that working to give education for the stateless and the refugees. These were already subjected to a lot of regulations from the ministries, from the relevant institution, from all these sectors, and then what kind of syllabus they are using now. So in the case of the Rohingya, where we are talking about roughly 3 million Rohingya stateless all around the world. Some of them are in Malaysia, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and India, Bangladesh, and so on, where even education such as basic educations are restricted in many kind. Like in the instance of Bangladesh, Bangladesh has announced that Rohingya are not allowed to learn the language Bengali so that they cannot integrate. And similarly goes to in India as well, and some part of Sri Lanka as well. So all these are now giving a huge issue now within the community. So now moving forward, when it comes to the education and mobility, all these students are what they are learning in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in India are the syllabus that are related to their own nationalistic agenda, which comes from teaching their own history, their own culture, and so on. Now, these refugees are now divided into different clusters and sectors and learning different things, which is not eventually relates to them. So now the huge important question that we now have to address is that will the stateless and the refugees continue, the universities and schools will continue to exclude them from this even virtual and online opportunity that they're gonna come in the future. So now those are the conditions. What I've spoken is not like what is going to happen, but it's what is happening right now to the refugees and citizens. Now, during the pandemic, it has actually accelerated more. From bad, it went to worst, where xenophobic ideas has come through, and people lost their jobs because they're refugees or they belong to a specific group such as Rohingya or any other of maybe Afghani or maybe Syrian or maybe Palestinian. So now they have lost their jobs, livelihood is in issue, so their parents do not have anything to support. Now children and others has to be forced to work now on the road and so on. Now, during that period, many institutions was already poorly funded, now do not have funding at all, totally dried out. And restriction on this social distancing has made into a huge issue. And this institution, small institution, was actually contributed by the local community, and when local community is being disturbed, so now that particular institution, which is already low funded, underfunded, is already stopped now. Not because it could be due to funding, it could be due to legal restriction, or cracking down by the authorities. Why are you doing this? You are an illegal immigrant or illegal refugee existing here. So it has made it into a lot of huge challenges for these stateless and the refugees to even maintain the poorly funded, poor structure with the all these institutions they have. So now we are now in a post-COVID. So now from bad it went to worse. Now from worse is getting even worse. So now what is happening right now is that where people are preparing for all this education, where a lot of first world problem is happening and white collar problems, which is why a student should be, why a student has to pay same amount of fee as they used to go physically because they are not using the facility like library and so on. While they're talking about this, we are talking about the basic, the ground level of survival. So education is already another. So now we're introducing, even though we introduce an online. So here we want to come on, what is the solution that we are offering? As a Rohingya project, of course, we know all this problem happening. So we have been planning for this to have an online university, online schools, online education. So while even providing that, the basics of that is that you need to have a good connection, you need to have a good device, you need to have a good infrastructure to get them online. So even that basic facility it doesn't have, like for instance, in Malaysia, refugees are not allowed to issue a SIM card. So if they don't have a SIM card, they don't have internet connection, then all the mobility and virtual and all these things are just trashed out. And now coming back, then in Bangladesh, refugee camps, which is 1.5 million people exist there, very low connection, and the connection is very limited from morning to evening. After that, there is no connection. Within this limited connection, also the bandwidth is extremely low. So if you have crossed the internet connection, somehow you manage to get the internet connection, and then you have the bandwidth issue. So if you have the bandwidth, if you cross the bandwidth issue, then you have extremely lower end devices. So these lower end, it is not an iPhone, it is not a laptop, it is not a Samsung. So it is extremely Chinese, cheap, Vietnamese kind of phones, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. If you use 3G, they don't have a 3G. Sometimes they have 3G. When you use video conferencing, then it heats up the whole device. Then you got to put it in the water before it cools down. So these are the problems that we are currently facing today. So we are conducting online classes now by, taking some volunteers from the United States, from Australia, from different parts of the world, giving classes online to this poor, marginalized community all around the world. We have students from Saudi Arabia, we have a student from Malaysia, we have a student from India, Indonesia, and many other countries where the existing infrastructure in local settings are not giving them access at all, which used to have badly. Now they are totally stopped. They said, because we cannot even provide our own children, own community, own local. So now people are, after the post, we are seeing a lot of colors in different countries, xenophobia and Islamophobia, and all these things is actually creating a huge issue among the locals itself. This race is against that race. So in this war, the war of elephant, I call it, and then these stateless and refugees are considered in a nation an ant. So these ants are being smashed within the fight of elephants. So I'm going back way to basics now. Before we get to even online, before the online you get to the universities, before the universities get to the schools, even those poorly facilities are not given access to these people. So what Rohingya project, a small project, is trying to contribute into this is that how can we bring this? Because before the online mobility and before the access, we already know that the only option. So for now, we are talking about different options for the different universities and the different schools. We are talking about marginalized status, which is according to UN report from stateless and the refugees, about 80 million people today, which is also produced by the nation state, unfortunately, by the conflict, by politics, by this and then, and now is without even solving yet. problems about to come in the Middle East and in South Asia, between India and Pakistan, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between Israel and other countries. So there is expected to produce more refugees and stateless people, but without proper instructions, without proper giving solution to this. Unfortunately, it's going to expand. Unfortunately, it's going to create a lot of, so now it will eventually result into many things: exploitation, crime. So these, when you don't have education, when you don't have this already, people are vulnerable to many different things. Now today, if you look at the Syrian camps in Turkey, if you look at the refugee camps in Bangladesh, where child exploitation and a lot of other horrific things are happening because of the education, because of this mobility, because of, so it's all exclusion kind of things that is happening around this topic. So that's why the reason that I am focusing on this is because this is a very, very important issue, especially after the COVID. These people are marginalized even further. These people are criminalized even further. These people have been pushed back even. So now we will see a lot of bad results coming out of this. As I told you, crime and so on. So now I will make it try to short. So the whole idea of doing this project like a Rohingya project is trying to contribute a very small factor. 80 million people we are talking about, what we're going to do, and increasing population, what we're going to do, how we're going to give them the access, how we're going to bring them and make them into a usable force and workforce for different parts. Today, if we have given them access, given access so they can work on a remote location on a different places, which was not possible earlier, so for different reasons. Today, so this is only a way of not technology, not about, so it's only a way of mindset and the issues, how we're going to handle this. Are we going to include them in a situation where virtual and online things will be easy? Can we include them, or do we want to include them to solve this crisis? So many universities and many other institutions, individual has a lot of responsibility as a human being. So we are talking about virtual and all this, but I'm going to end up. Does a stateless and a refugee do not have the right to education at all? Forget about online. And so that is my final thing, that are they not human beings? They do not have access. So I believe now the way it's moving forward, I can predict. I hope it will not happen, but I predict that they will also be excluded and they will be further marginalized on this context if we do not put it on the table, for everyone to grab this, because this is responsibility for every educated person. Because we are educated, we have the right to give them access to also education, to have a better life, rather than pushing them away. So we cannot turn our blind eye. It has to be a shared responsibility on an individual level and organizational level. Thank you for all the hosts who can move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muhammad Noor, for your very important information about the problems and the reality that stateless and refugees are confronting in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to invite the last speaker of our panel today, Professor Haruko Sato. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm the final speaker, and with a very sobering story from Noor. I'm actually going to go to a rather perhaps parochial concern, but rather also explain, touching upon all the points, particularly what Farish brought, Moin brought, and Mochizuki Sensei also raised in talking about the Japanese situation, particularly in the context, in a very large context of Japanese universities and the challenges of internationalization. never mind going online. And I'm going to divide my sort of intervention into two parts. One just sort of talks more generally about what is happening with what the COVID pandemic brought out in terms of how the world was progressing or not progressing, because I do international relations. So I think that, so I find, first of all, I think what we're talking about here are things about like connectivity, mobility, the borderless world, collaboration, and so forth. I think these were some, and globalization, of course. And in the past 30 years, indeed, I think one of the phenomenons were about increased connectivity, increased mobility, increased sort of harmonization of trading laws, international regimes, and so on and so forth, which was supposed to be, and if you think about the World Wide Web and the internet, which originally was conceived as a way for scientists and militaries in the United States to exchange information on time in various locations. I think there's something that, technologically speaking, now we're speaking about artificial intelligence, that in this communication, in terms of communication and digital communication, the world has changed a lot, and it has increased and sort of in a way opened up this cyberspace of global communication, exchange of ideas, as well as harassment, attacks, fake news, what have you. But what I found with the COVID very interesting and rather sad was how this became both the weapon and the bane of how to respond to the crisis. Because if you think about how the Chinese originally, and they released the genetic code for the COVID-19, the virus, and this of course was, this tells you about how advanced all of our science and epidemiology have become by everybody sharing it at once and then scrambling for hopefully producing a vaccine. So that's one thing that I think that international collaboration in the sciences have really, really sort of been advanced by this connectivity. But when we come down to the actual responses to the COVID, all of a sudden, and because of perhaps partly due to the failure, actually say a lot of the failure of the WHO, that the responses became parochial, nationalized, and actually quite varied. I think everybody quite, would immediately understand some of the lockdowns, as well as the countries that had lockdowns, and most of Asia, we went on to a soft lockdown. But if you think about the debates, the raging debates, particularly in the United States, but also mostly in the Western countries, about wearing face masks, and it's going on for 8 months now, without any sort of consensus, and even sometimes dissent and defiance of wearing face masks, I think is baffling. And from an international collaboration point of view, this I thought the COVID thing really brought back the state as the central actor to everything, meaning because everybody was closing borders. So the borderless world, where whatever we were trying to do, all came to a halt. And student mobility, of course, is one of them. But so I think this is the background in which I think we really have to start thinking about reinstituting, as we go back to a norm, or if we are going back to some kind of a norm, of rethinking these international institutions, or the viability of international law, the spirit of collaboration and cooperation. All of these things, unfortunately, the World Wide Web, at least, now seems to be splitting into two, with the world that is controlled by China and the rest, which is supposedly free and open. So we are having a serious geopolitical paradigm shift in which the post-45 institutions and regimes, and as Noor said about mindsets, all have to be wired and changed differently, which isn't, I don't think, so this is basically the context in which I want to sort of set my Japanese internationalization story, because I think Japan also, it's not about sort of singularizing Japan, but Japan has an interesting story to tell of some of the challenges and the opportunities that are open as we try to rethink international politics, or these the global governance and global community issues. So I think Mochizuki Sensei and Moin would very much know that not just the Osaka University, but internationalizing Japanese universities has been a sort of an impossible task, not caused by one reason or another, but a combination of many, many things: institutional inertia, slow bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. But I would like to focus actually on on the one issue, which is English. I do not believe that speaking English is the way to internationalize. That isn't the way I look at it. However, Japan has this unique inability to actually engage more sort of freely, without sort of getting all tensed up, in this vast intellectual community that operates in English. It's a common language for everybody. But for some reason, we are very hesitant. Students shy away, even though I think Japanese university students and Japanese universities, even though they may not rank highly amongst the bigwigs at Harvard or Yale, is a repository of extremely advanced intellectual knowledge. So in the higher learning in particular. So it's actually, I always feel it's a shame that because we operate somehow parochially in Japanese, that a lot of the good things are overlooked in how the Japanese universities, what the kind of knowledge and we produce. And I just want to introduce one episode, which actually is very much as a curse of the early modernizing, because Farish was telling us about the Southeast Asian university's role as in the part of the nation state making of the middle class creation, and that it was imperative for the Southeast Asian elites or the middle class to go abroad to study and then to come back. Japan started its modern nation making much, much earlier, in the days when it took months and months and months to travel. And of course, the cost of going abroad was enormous. It wasn't really like, okay, student mobility, let's do this. And also something to do with the Japanese history and modernization, which was about importing knowledge. This is what we did throughout our sort of civilizing history, either from China or from the Dutch or from the West. And so when we started off with these modern university creations, one of the degrees or the subject that you could major in was translation. And so that you would actually be learning how to translate the advanced, sort of science or his science books and so on and so forth. And that has been one of the very interesting characteristics about Japanese modernization, is the indigenization of international knowledge. And in some ways, this has been still the tradition. Of course, you don't have the degree in translation anymore, but it still remains that a lot of the works, even in social sciences, particularly in the field that I do, international relations, a lot of things are done in translation. And but the thing is, this is in one way good, But the other thing is, particularly if you look at the science and engineering and the technological side, we also have the body of lexicon, the vocabulary in the high tech, which is also translated. Basically, for young Japanese students, if they want to do nuclear physics, they don't necessarily have to go abroad to actually study the high cutting edge sites. Of course, they would have to be able to read English, but in the main, we still have there's this evolving advancing vocabulary that's already sort of, that builds upon the already built up vocabs from the past, which in some ways, I think it's the huge disincentive to actually venture out and say, okay, let's make English the language at universities. Because why do you need to do it if you can, get as much knowledge in Japanese? And if you compare the situation with China and Korea, it's the difference actually becomes quite stark too. The Chinese and the Koreans, when they basically started to sort of really take off and modernize from the 80s onwards, is basically they also sent a lot of students abroad. The Chinese likewise, if you look at now, the Chinese students, you have a lot of people who've worked in Microsoft or, whatever, coming back to China to build their so on and so forth. So I think the Japanese really, in some ways, missed the window to try and sort of see, to switch or at least have more of a hybrid of how we accumulate and disseminate knowledge, particularly in the academe. And so I've been thinking about I'm going to, and but now with this opportunity to go online and to sort of, as everybody was suggesting, from creating a third space, as well as increasing sort of more double degree programs, or sort of more sort of a synergy between the Japanese universities and particularly with Southeast Asian universities, because I do know that Osaka University has a very sort of symbiotic relationship, particularly in fields like biotech, is to start shifting towards creating modules that are conducted exclusively in English, but they are credited in Japanese universities, so that, and I think, so that for one, it will actually open up a new sort of consortium of universities that could offer, a different level of education and also some sort of diverse cultural experience. But at the same time, and I'm hoping that this would be encouraging for the Japanese students, is that it will actually give them access to English and English teaching and English communication without feeling intimidated by the physical presence or having to adjust to a different living style, say by studying in the United States or in the United Kingdoms, which I know that could be a huge sort of social and cultural disruption if you've basically grown up in Japan all your life until you were like 18 or 19. And so if we start doing something like this, and I do realize, because with the COVID, I've conducted the online courses, and I had a couple of Japanese students taking, and they tended to be bilingual. But because the ease and the economy with which we can do things online, and particularly in terms of delivering lectures or a classroom, I do think that this might really be the opportunity for Japan to seriously address the issue of becoming more, how should I say, at ease, and also understanding of having to communicate and in an English-speaking intellectual world. Because as I said, the Japanese universities are competitive internationally. They can. The professors are competitive. There's some, very good academics. We have very good, seriously, competitive sort of a level of education that I think in some areas, maybe not in the arts or humanities, but, some areas are probably, at the very, very top of the world rankings. Because I know that if Osaka University sort of divided the performance by the graduate schools, I know that, the engineering or the medical schools are like way, way up. But I think it's a shame that we can't open this up and to change our teaching culture, to change our university culture to be a little more sort of not, sort of how should I say, open to internationalization and to sort of that isn't about like numerical targets or about how many foreign students we have and so on and so forth. Because at the end of the day, the Japanese population is declining. It's only mathematics to know that the Japanese universities, many of them will have to go bankrupt. They have to disappear. We have too few students. If they only operate in Japanese, or they are shy about doing things in English. Whereas I think this online gives the perfect setup for the usually very sort of shy and Japanese institutions, as well as the people, to actually start finding ways of interacting with the outside world at their own pace. So this, I think, this is basically my sort of 2 cents to this whole panel about student mobility and the future, particularly in this post-COVID world setting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haruko. So I have an impression that we have so many topics to discuss. Everything is on the table. Yeah, as Haruko pointed out, regression to the state or a kind of nationalism is happening, and yeah, it is true that a big geopolitical paradigm shift is happening right now, and collaboration and specialization are the key factors to manage virtual mobility. Yes, and yeah, it's true that university is something more than offering courses and degree programs. So we need to enhance culture and social exchange, and we also have to be inclusive. We should not exclude stateless and refugees. They need more solid infrastructure and connectivity. Yeah. So we have a lot of things to talk about, and we also have some questions from the floor, from the on the chat here. So we still have some more 16 or 17 minutes for discussion. I mean, questions and answers. So, well, we have a question from Violet Valdez to everyone. He poses this question, I read it. Do you think the present situation offers an opportunity further de-Westernization of Asian education? So who will respond to this question?
I think Faris has already been responding to that. Faris will
this question is addressed to Professor Faris now. So could you please respond to this
Yes,
question?
well, I did answer in the thread, but I think my position, and I think I share this with my friend Haruko here as well. For the longest time, there's been a lot of discussion about, the decolonization of knowledge and this South to South collaboration. This goes all the way back to the time of Bandung and things like that. But as Haruko noted, in our modernization process, the whole of Asia has literally adopted this sort of Westphalian Eurocentric model of where the nation state is seen as the primary actor. And I think the problem with this is that the entire South to South agenda was turned into a prerogative of states rather than communities. And by this I include the communities of academics. So there's still so much work that has to be done. But in answer to Juliet's question earlier, why have we stalled? Why are we so behind? And I think part of the answer lies with the point that Haruko raised. Our modernization process, whether we like to admit it or not, is really Eurocentric. And because it's Eurocentric, it always returns us back to the Western paradigm as the ideal model. So if we are talking about collaboration, and now we see an opportunity for collaboration and increased, closer working together with other Asian universities, African universities, South American universities, we have to change that mindset. And that mindset is what is apparent in university administrations. So the example I gave, when we as Asian academics, we are constantly being told to publish, but when we publish, if I choose to publish with an Asian university press, invariably, we know this, right? We will be told that, try to aim for a Western university press. Try to get yourself printed by, Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge or what have you. And that just supports that paradigm. We don't change anything. And so how are we going to ever get around this? And that's why I think this is the time for us to find the niches. Haruko is right. In Asia, our respective universities have certain areas of expertise, which I think we should capitalize upon at the moment. For instance, if there's one thing that Southeast Asia can offer now, it's Southeast Asian studies. Yeah, I mean, why on earth would someone have to fly to London to learn about Southeast Asia? It doesn't make sense to me. And if you want to learn about Southeast Asia, you go to Southeast Asia. If I want to learn about East Asia, I wouldn't fly to Harvard to do that. I'll go to East Asia, Japan, China, or Korea, or what have you. So now's the time where I think we need to get our acts together, because, like I said earlier, many universities in the developed world already have a head start. There are many universities in Europe and in North America that are already offering full courses online. If we don't see this opportunity, take this opportunity to get our acts together and to identify, the areas where we are likely to dominate that particular academic niche, that opportunity will be lost. And my worry is that, let's say a cure is found for COVID and we go back to the old norm, if that ever happens, then definitely this paradigm shift won't happen. So I'm really hoping that, a conscious effort is being made. This very conference is proof that we can do this sort of work. Yeah, the very fact that we are from all over the world talking now is proof. However, Mushizuki-san, if you don't mind, I think Mohammed raised a very important point about refugees. And I think the important thing about this current crisis is that it's actually taught non-refugees what it's like to be a refugee. Because for the longest time, refugees were not allowed to travel. Well, now ordinary people who thought they could travel cannot travel, right? So for the first time, it's universalized the status of the refugee. We are all refugees now. None of us can travel, right? And I think this is a very important learning experience. But if you don't mind, Mohammed, I think apart from refugees, my other concern, especially in Asia, where we see huge gaps of wealth, is the poor, right? Because it's not simply refugees in camps, it's poor people. We're talking about Asia, where we have enormous slums, where there's no internet connection, as you know. There's very poor accessibility to education. Even physical schools, are not fully present. So we must address this because I'm really worried about a future where increasingly education is something for the privileged, the middle class, and the well-to-do. And I think if that were to happen, then I think we as academics, we've really failed.
Thank you very much. Yes, yeah, I think too that the inclusiveness is a key word to talk about the virtual mobility. So, Muhammad Noor, do you have any reaction to?
Yes, I mean, yes, what Brother Dr. Faris has mentioned, yes. The other thing about poor people, of course, in Southeast Asia and in Asia, in India, in Pakistan, slums where do not have all this connectivity. So I also would just want to add one thing on top of that. Of course, being is a very good example brother has given what it feels like to be blockaded, what it feels like to be, you know, kept at home, what it feels like to be refugee and stateless. Having on top of that, these refugees we are talking about, these are not, some of them are not generational refugees like Rohingyas are, fifth generation, fourth generation. Some of these refugees are doctors, engineers, and scientists, but because of the war and political situation of different parts of the world, these people are driven. Their parents were highly educated into science, astronomical, engineering, and so on, and their children became beggars immediately after that. So it could happen to anyone. So there's a pipeline going on from middle class and high class. You can be pushed into poor immediately because of war, because of politics, because of that, and that poor will result into refugees or even stateless, and it could happen to anyone. So we are safeguards and gatekeepers of all this. So we have to really make sure that who are these refugees? These are, it could be me, it could be you, it could be anybody, because these nation states can revoke your identity within a second because you have said something else. Today you are a Japanese or American passport holder. When you wake up, you are nothing. Or in the middle of the plane, you will stuck in Russia, for seeking asylum. So these kind of things can happen to anyone. So all these children of refugees, their parents were highly educated. I mean, I have seen, you wouldn't believe, atomic scientist is selling, bread on the road of Indonesia and Malaysia. There were Syrians, there were this, and now the children are struggling to learn basic education as well. So it's very, very important. So these were the good citizens, and they were made into poor, and from poor they went to, so now they went below the poverty line. Not within decades, within one decade, within a couple of years.
Mm.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it can happen to anyone. That's true. Yeah. So, Haruko, do you have any reaction to the previous talks?
I'm just actually, because Farish and I are trying to start a pilot lecture which opens doors to both OSIP students as well as to the RSIS students as a way, because, but the thing that I very much take seriously, but I'm still sort of thinking about at what level can we work, not just academics, but in sort of global governance sense, about what Mohammed was talking about in terms of infrastructure building, addressing not as just refugees or stateless, but also for the poor, in terms of recognizing and how do properly formulate, or even as Mohammed was saying, about starting the proper dialogue of trying to look at the situation concretely, not leave it to the aid agencies or and so forth, but as a serious political agenda for all of the member states in the UN, if we are supposedly doing the sustainable development goals, which is supposed to leave no one behind. And I just get the feeling that somewhere we're still missing a lot of proper channels that need to be connected. And I think about this because as we were talking about universities, and it isn't just about universities, it is really about this whole setup, the structure of the political economy, how our jobs are created, why do we get educated? It's not just about university education, it's about the K-12, or even vocational training. Like, was it Google just started a course to basically job train online? So now I think it also brings in the question of what are universities for? What are public intellectuals? What are this academic world? How do we adapt and contribute to this, not just post-COVID, but this very becoming postmodern, but a very different world from when these institutions and the structures were set up starting off like 200 years ago. There's so many things, as Mochizuki Sensei says, on the table. But I do think that, as you know, we do need to connect and start sort of actively actually speaking to everybody, and if it means, you know, going to the United Nations, going to our governments to say, look, if we're going to do a development, assistance program, these are the kind of things that should be addressed. I mean, it's just many of the prioritizations maybe just needs to be recalibrated. So, yep, Farish, go ahead.
Just to follow up on Haruko's point, yeah, I think if we're going to actually engage, and we need to engage beyond universities, because let's face it, as academics, we work according to parameters that are set by the respective institutions we work in and work for. But we need that mindset to change at the level of administration, and this includes governments. And I think one thing that we need to introduce into this discussion in our engagements is a new understanding of mobility, because this panel has been talking about student mobility, and we've always assumed that mobility means physical mobility. I move from Singapore to Japan. But mobility today, and this is why Muhammad Noor's point is very important, mobility also means moving from the physical realm to the virtual realm. If people do not have access to the internet, they are not mobile. So we're talking about a kind of internet mobility. Mobility today is not just moving from country to country or place to place, but moving from place to virtual. That's another mobility that people are not discussing. And I think this is why, Haruko, in these discussions that we are seeing at the UN level or what have you, the people that Muhammad has been talking about are being left out. The poor, refugees, marginalized, stateless people, because somehow they don't count in the calculations of the nation state. But we have to emphasize this again and again. Mobility is not just moving your body, it's moving your body into cyberspace. And you don't have mobility if you don't even have Wi-Fi, for heaven's sakes. If the state won't give you access to the internet, you are denying mobility. And I think this is an important point we need to emphasize again and again.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yes, it is. So we need to ensure the common platform for mobile mobility, virtual mobility, and on that common platform, we need to have dialogues between different stakeholders, including different countries, different social classes, and so far. Mohammed Moinuddin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just one point. In fact, the whole discussion has led us to a point that we feel that we are missing a very important aspect, that is the socio-political instability that might be caused maybe after 6 months we may see the result, or maybe after, if we see any kind of post-COVID situation. Okay, I think not all the universities or institutions are as brave as we have seen in the case of America, that they went against the president decision of stopping sending some students who are now online to go away from America. Okay, so another concern that's coming here, I think it is very much related to the socio-political instability. It is that if you lost a job, the local people are going to go against the foreigners. It's very clear that they're going to, the foreigners is going to forget about the refugees part. I'm talking about those who are non-refugees, who are going there on a proper visa with a proper fee structure. They may have a very hard time in this situation. I think these points, looking at the time, I think these points shall be discussed in further, and hope we'll continue our discussion in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Now it's 2:15. It's time to end this panel. So
Yes.
thank you again for your presentations and discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mochizuki Sensei. And I have been tasked to end this main room for today. The main room will close until 11:30 tomorrow morning, when we come back with the dialogue about food. So thank you very much, everybody, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.